Okay, ANP1 students, in this video we're going to talk about one last attraction. This one's going to occur between molecules, and it is called hydrogen bonding. So remember we talked about ionic bonds and covalent bonds. So now we're going to talk about hydrogen bonds. So it is different than the ionic and covalent bonds because it happens between two molecules. So that's why we call it intermolecular, which means between molecules. All right, so this hydrogen bond forms between polar molecules. So I'm going to show you a picture here and kind of remind you of what we call a polar molecule. So this is showing glucose here. This is considered a polar molecule. And then each one of these is a polar molecule as well, and that's representing water. So when we say a polar molecule, we are talking about a molecule that is formed by polar covalent bonds. So we used water as our example in the last video. So remember, when we have a polar covalent bond, we have that unequal sharing of electrons, and because of that reason, we're going to have a charge difference across that molecule. So in this case, the electrons spend more time around the oxygen atom, so it has a slight negative or partial negative charge, and electrons spend less time around the hydrogen atom, so they have a partial positive charge. So, and glucose is also a polar molecule like water, where it has hydrogen atoms that have that partial positive charge. So it's made up of polar covalent bonds as well. So the hydrogen bond can only occur between two polar molecules. So in one of those polar molecules, the atom one of the atoms must be a hydrogen atom. And remember, hydrogen atoms are going to have that partial positive charge, partial positive charge. And so in this case, here's the hydrogen atom that's part of the polar molecule glucose. And so it has a slight positive charge, and it's forming a hydrogen bond. That's what these little dashed lines represent, with that oxygen of this water molecule. And remember, oxygen of a water molecule has a partial negative charge. So then we get this attraction here. Okay, so this is a weak attraction, meaning that that's kind of easy to break compared to like covalent bonds and ionic bonds. This is much easier to break. But when you have hydrogen bonds between numerous molecules, you start to have this collective, you have all these hydrogen bonds, and collectively they are very strong. So collectively, by themselves, not so strong. They can be, that attraction can be broken pretty easily. But if we have a lot of a lot of hydrogen bonds between polar molecules, collectively they're pretty strong. So I'm going to give you examples of how hydrogen bonds are, or where they're present in the various parts of our body and molecules of our body. So I have the pictures on our PowerPoints here. Okay, so everybody hopefully is familiar with DNA. So this is showing the DNA, the double helix. So remember, we have two strands that make up DNA, and they twist around each other. So you can see them twisting here. So, but here we kind of straighten them out a little bit so that way we can look at this strand and this strand. So right between the bases that are attached to each of the strands, that is a hydrogen bond. So each one of those is a hydrogen bond. So the hydrogen bonding that's present between these molecules, so these polar molecules, is providing that structure of DNA. So one of the reasons DNA looks as it does and has this particular shape and structure is because of those hydrogen bonds. Okay, so that's one example of where you can find hydrogen bonds. The other example is in proteins. So we haven't talked about proteins in detail yet, but we will kind of go over them briefly here so you can kind of see how hydrogen bonds contribute to the shape and structure of proteins. So this is an example of each one of those little ball-like structures is a different amino acid, and that's the building blocks of proteins are amino acids. So each one of those are amino acids, and those are polar molecules. So, and this is how the protein initially is made. Just amino acids are bonded together, and then they just start forming this long chain. But proteins don't stay, most proteins don't stay in like a linear shape like this. What they'll do is they'll start folding against itself, and then we'll get hydrogen bonds that occur between different amino acids. And then we'll start getting, we could get a helical shape, kind of looks a little similar to DNA. We could get a pleated, kind of a pleated shape too. But again, there's little hydrogen bonds that are keeping this protein in this particular shape. And then we even go further. Proteins get even more folded onto each other and have different shapes. So we have some pleated areas and some helical areas. But again, and then you'll have a couple of polypeptides like form hydrogen bonds with each other so this is like 4 different proteins, and they all came together and hydrogen bonds are holding them together. So then this is like the complete protein, and it has this particular shape so it can do its particular function, but it has to have that shape in order to do it. So that's where you can find those hydrogen bonds, and we'll talk more about hydrogen bonds when we talk about water in the next video. But that is our last attraction that we need to be familiar with. So in the next video, we will start talking about water and its functions within the body and kind of its properties and how its properties relate to its function. So we'll see you in the next video.